Hello and welcome back to the Projector Stories Podcast. I'm Sarah, a 1-3 emotional projector.
I'm Lora, I'm a 5-1 splenic projector.
And in this podcast, we just like to talk about what is going on with us on our deconditioning journey as it relates to our daily comings and goings, etc. If you have been here before, you already know that, so we're just reiterating. And if you haven't, you can always go back and listen to the first episode, the welcome episode, so you can get more acclimated. Lora, happy almost summer solstice. Summer solstice is tomorrow. Has there been anything going on with you in your mind, in your life, in all of the ways, in any way that has made you want to talk about it?
As it relates to human design, quote unquote, or not quote unquote, but like within brackets, or not. Sort of. I mean, I don't think it relates to human design, but I guess we could possibly relate it to human design. But I've had a lot of brain fog recently, and I told you this in our side conversation, but it made me think about what I said last episode about how I wasn't using my brain to make a rational decision and therefore leading myself to injury. I shouldn't have been hard on myself because my brain hasn't been working. And like even last episode, I had difficulty finding words and my brain was just not making connections with vocabulary and meaning. And that's been happening in other non-pod related conversations I have with like normal humans. Not that you're not a normal human, but normal conversations.
I'm certainly not. Thank you very much.
None of us are. There is no normal human. But anyways, in my normal conversations, I haven't been able to think of words, especially if multitasking. Man, oh man, like my brain just will not work. Where I can't do two things at like sometimes I can multitask, usually no, but in the past couple weeks, it's been especially worse. And I start doing things and I forget what I'm doing. And yeah, my brain has not been operating smoothly. Uh, and yeah, I'm just very aware of it, which again, don't know if it relates to human design or not, but it relates to what we talked about last week of my harshness with me accusing myself of not thinking. But of course I wasn't thinking because my brain isn't working normally. So that's it. That's the only thing I think I wanted to bring up today. We've had 1222 this past week. I don't know if it's still in action or not with the sun being in 12. But right now, today, this morning, in this moment, it's the moodiness of not necessarily wanting to talk, but more so wanting to listen. So I can let you take the reins with this episode, Sarah, because I don't think there's anything else I really want to say.
Well, I don't know. We've said this before to everyone. We don't plan this, but I certainly have a lot of different things to say. So it's a good time to be not as I guess initiatory, Laura. And for me, a good time to be initiatory, I guess. But I was gonna ask: are we still in the 12, or are we in the 15 now?
I don't know. I was looking at transits. And I didn't, my brain, it did not remember, Sarah. Surprise, surprise. I looked at them. Okay. I didn't retain any information of what I looked at, apart from Mercury's in 52, which will relate to something you probably want to talk about later. But yeah, I don't remember. I think probably we're in the 10. We're in the 10, 15. So 12, 22 is over for everyone. But yeah.
Yeah, for us, it's not, but for everyone who doesn't have the 12 natally, it sure is. Yeah, there was a bunch of different things that I wanted to bring up from the last episode, but then, I mean, not even from the last episode, but like, well, some of them relate to the last episode, but really they're more so.
Have we convinced you to listen to the last episode yet or not? Because we keep bringing it up. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. Hopefully. I mean, there was a lot of good shit in there. Okay. So, and I tend to think that about all of the episodes, but as it works, as the mind works, it's like, these aren't little moments in a vacuum. Like we're working on on a kind of movement. And so one thought leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. And here we are. So of course, whatever I was thinking last week will always have some kind of an effect on what I'm thinking this week. Because that's kind of the nature of the way that I think we move through linear space-time, but that's neither here nor there. There's a bunch of different things I wanted to say. The first on the 1510, because the summer solstice is like a pretty powerful time. Just generally speaking, we're in the vessel of love, and the vessel of love, and I mean that the sun and the earth are in two gates that are part of the vessel of love cross, and the other two gates are the ones that happen on the equinoxes, the spring and fall equinox. And so all four of those gates, the equinox and the solstice gates, all exist inside of the G center. And the G center has so much to do with direction and identity. And it's where the magnetic monopole sits, which is essentially what holds our crystals of consciousness together within the illusion of our separateness in the Maya. And so it's so important, like location and identity, and kind of like the just beingness I've noticed come up during these time periods, like the nature of being and kind of the ineptitude of the mind in being able to be. It's like there's always this juxtaposition that we find ourselves in between the body and the personality consciousness. And it's really hard too, because I feel like we need to come up with a better way to describe the not self mind versus like our personality, and what it kind of exists as this ethereal secondary aspect of self that is not necessarily the mind in the not self sense of the term. But sometimes I use them interchangeably, and then I understand how confusing that is later. But nonetheless, our personality consciousness and the physical body are kind of like these not necessarily so comfortable bedfellows at times. And I feel like these moments, specifically when we move into the vessel of love areas on the equinoxes and the solstices, can kind of bring that energetic juxtaposition into stark relief. And I think we're brought more into the body during the summer solstice. That's my feeling on it. And so the personality may have more of a difficulty staying like embodied if it hasn't been kind of in a more coherent state with the other half of itself. If it's been like its awareness has been places that its awareness should not be because of the not self mind. Is that all really confusing, Laura?
No, I don't think so. But again, I don't trust my brain, so don't ask me to confirm or deny anything this episode.
I'm like, oh shit. Okay, well, I just wanted to speak to that for a moment, because it is the 15 has to do with, and maybe you can chime in here if your brain is working in this respect, but it has to do with like the aura and the love of humanity in general. And so it's kind of like a larger energetic kind of interconnectivity that I feel coming out of the 15. But then there's the 10. And I think that has more to do with like the correct behavior of self in the now. And so these two things are, they're opposites. The 10 is in Capricorn and the 15 is in Cancer. But nonetheless, they are, both in the G center. Do you want to speak to anything on the G center or the 15 or the 10?
Well, maybe the vessel of love. So the vessel is, you can imagine a pitcher, and the pitcher has an external wall, an internal wall, the spout, I believe, and the contents that it holds. And now let's try to remember which gate is which aspect of the vessel. 15 is also the love of extremes. And I think one previous episode, I was questioning myself, like, is there a gate of extremes? And I couldn't remember which one. Hello, it's gate 15, the gate of extremes.
Yeah.
There we go. So the extremes of humanity's just wildness and craziness, and the acceptance of all the different which ways that it means to be human, which are the good ways and the bad ways. all the which ways, which a lot of people have resistance to. We're not so accepting of the extremes of humanity, which is interesting because it's like a logical gate of collective circuitry. So it's, certain extremes get ingrained into patterns and then they take hold and then they proliferate. And it's probably when they proliferate that humanity has a bone to pick with it. But yeah, I don't know. I know the 46 is the love of the body, which is probably one
Mhm.
of the two walls. Um, Maybe 10 is like the contents within the vessel, but also maybe not. I really don't know.
Man,
25
I
is the love
remember
of
that.
spirit.
Yeah.
We'll come back to this on another episode because yeah, my brain thought it knew it, but it really does not know it. But
Oh my gosh, I remember that analogy though, and it was really good when you came up with it.
I didn't come
Um,
up with it. Raw
well,
came
the
up with
40
it.
Raw came up with it?
Yeah,
Okay. For some reason I thought it
it's
was
in
you.
the whatever the book is where he talks about all the lines. The I Ching, the Brave I Ching. I think that's
Okay.
the line
Okay.
companion. It's the line companion. There we go. My brain. I apologize in advance. It's in the line companion within like when he goes through those four gates that he talks about it.
Okay, okay. So the 46 is definitely the external, like the vase itself.
Probably, yeah. The love of
Yeah.
form, of
Yeah.
appearances, of being within the world. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we'll just move on from that, and we'll come back to it.
Or
We'll come
not,
back
if we
to
forget.
we'll come back to it during the fall equinox. See you in 3 months on that topic. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to talk about, at least in terms of like the way that I've come into human design has been through astrology, and even like I've studied Kundalini yoga and other different kinds of like yogic systems, and in all of them, these are really important points of the year. And the thing to recognize too is that in the northern hemisphere we have a maximal amount of light, which is, it means something for our physicality, for our body, for our lives in the Maya, to have a certain amount of light that exists in the day that is at its maximum. um, Usually, it's going to look different for everyone, but I like to describe it in terms of the kind of moment that is after we have seeded something. You could say during the winter solstice 6 months ago, it could be energetic, it could be a seed actually seeding something, it could be, an idea, it could be an unconscious behavior. Like we see the fruits of that 6 months down the line during the peak of the solstice, because this is the moment of maximum light. And then from there, we get to kind of turn backwards and start to review what has happened in the first 6 months. And then that begins the process of review, that takes us into the winter solstice, and the kind of process repeats itself. Now, just to say, these processes are happening in greater or lesser ways with all of the planets as they all are circumambulating around the sun, and we, the earth, are circumambulating around the sun too. And so there's always these kind of larger or smaller cycles that are happening. And um and so it's just, this is one of the more pronounced ones, because so much of, in human design, so much of where the energy that we experience comes from is from our sun. And so what it is doing and its larger cycles compared to the earth seem to be like of paramount importance compared to some of the other cycles. But I would say that there's always multitudes of cycles happening simultaneously, no matter where you are in space. There's a bunch of things happening all at once. So I'll leave it there on the summer solstice, unless, Laura, do you want to touch on anything
Well,
else that
yeah,
I see?
something comes to mind, which is the friction that comes up with thinking about the northern hemisphere being superior, like the patriarchy, like we talked about last episode, compare or whatever episode it was, compared to the southern hemisphere, because we associate the seasons with signs, with astrological signs and constellations. And there is this inherent connectivity between them that allows us to interpret meaning from the constellations, from locations in the sky with the cycles of the earth. And yet on the southern hemisphere, they have the opposite because like they're in their winter solstice now, and yet it is still Cancer. therefore it's the same position in the sky that is reflecting a completely different meaning to them. It's the same gates within the zodiac or within the I Ching, whatever it is, the mandala. It's still gate 15, but it has the topsy-turvy interpretation of it being connected to the winter, to darkness. And I don't know, it just makes me think about how we can better homogenize, for lack of a better word, better emulsify the different meanings with the seasons of the earth and all that jazz. And I don't know, put it together in a way that doesn't separate the Southern Hemisphere from the greater picture, or we can interpret it for them in a way that is true to them. I don't know. It's weird to think about. And again, like astrology was like originally created basically around the equator, goodness, right? With Egypt, Babylonia, all those places are pretty darn close to the equator. So they're kind of central. They're neither north nor south, neither extreme. And yet, as Western astrology, I mean, I guess Indian astrology is in the southern hemisphere, is it not? Or is it also near the equator? I don't know.
Well,
How do they interpret it if they're southern and they have the opposite solstices? I'm not sure. Do they? I think they are
I mean,
south.
I think that like and just to say, like, I don't think one's better than the other. I just think that
Well,
my
no, no, no. But I'm not saying that they are, but out in the world, like Western astrology has taken over in the like Western's astrology, it's Northern astrology compared to Southern astrology. And it's the more prevalent form, not necessarily that it's better, but sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
No, no. I mean, I have a lot of bones to pick with modern astrology and pop astrology. So there's all kinds of reasons that I'm not touting astrology all the time like I have in the past, but I'm not going to dig into that right now. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is like there's a connectivity to the physical body when we touch on these extreme points and when we touch on the equal points, whether they be in the north or southern hemisphere. I can only speak to one side of it because I've never been to the other. So my own experience can only kind of traverse this particular terrain. And I would imagine that there's a way to kind of include just everything in it if we go down there and we see what their lives are like during this time of year versus their winter or their summer in our winter. So it's definitely something to think about for sure. And if anyone that listens is on the southern hemisphere, like I'm sure that the point that I'm trying to make is that the physicality of you is going to be affected by these kind of extreme points in seasonality no matter what. And so they serve as some kind of a moment to be reflective, I think, on certain things. And maybe right now it's time for people to seed something, right? And then it's time for other people to see the results of what was seeded. But nonetheless, these are kind of like two like ultimate points, whether on the yin or the yang side, on the light or the dark side. So trying to be inclusive here when I say that it is, yeah, it's an interesting dynamic to think about as we move throughout the year. I always reflect on these days because there is an obvious connection with our physical bodies and the energy that we get from the increased amount of sunlight. I mean, it's not like we go to sleep the same way or at the same time in the winter as we do in the summer. I mean, I don't. I feel like everything's alive.
I can't help but laugh because I have a microclimate. I complained to Sarah a lot about sorry, I'm interrupting again. I said I was going to be quiet this episode, and here I am. I complained to Sarah a lot about my microclimate because it is a little dense, compact snow globe of fog, constant fog. Actually, like this past week, we had a bit more sun, but today it's foggy again. And when it's foggy, my brain is not, it's like, it's winter. Let's keep on sleeping. And so today, I think I woke up at like 9:30. Even though the sun rises earlier and earlier, like, no, my body rejects the idea of waking up if it's not bright and sunny outside. And so, yes, there is sun and like it's out there and the sun is rising, but within my little microclimate, I'm gonna keep on sleeping until that sun is shining. And so I'm sleeping a lot more than I normally would if it was like actually warm. So sorry, I just had to throw in that little
And
tidbit.
that's fair, and that's your experience. And then, I have like my kind of cohort of people that I speak to who also are going through the kind of extreme energy surges that you would expect to get from an increased amount of sun. And so there may be, I guess you could say, exceptions, but I think that, from my own, I guess you could say, data that I've collected, it seems like there's an increase of energy. But maybe for you in your microclimate, there's also like data that would suggest that people really don't have as much of an effect with these extreme points. I don't know. I can only speak for what I know. Anyway, so do you want to say anything else on the solstice?
Well, no, I mean, it just makes sense. Like with sun, the sun gives plants energy. It gives us energy too. Like we feel more alive with the sun. So it makes sense. Like if it's warmer, we're just going to have more energy to go out and about and do things. Hence the increase in energy, the increase in yang. Apart from weird little microclimates where that's not possible, or like people who live in the equator, who they have constancy all year long. Like, what's it like for them? I wonder. Time to go traveling, I think is the
Point.
lesson within this episode. Go look at different places and
I know,
see
like
what it is to live there.
I really want to go south of the equator now. Just if for nothing else, because I'm eating all raw right now, that I want to get some really good fruits. And I think that they probably have better ones than we do here in Florida. Which I guess brings me to my next point, and it's actually pretty on the nose since we're talking about extremes. And this was something that I was thinking about because last episode, I don't know what we were talking about in reference to, Laura, but you said something along the lines of like it's better for the human body to like find kind of some state of balance. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I forgot the context around it. But it's something my mother says to me a lot, of how like we often observe people doing extremes, whether it's extreme like yo-yo dieting or this or that. And like she has um gate 15, so she does her fair share of extremism. But we notice it a lot and we talk about it a lot because we see it in other people. And so it's probably why I brought it up because she probably brought it up to me recently. But we usually come back to the same conclusion that like sometimes it's best just to like do everything in moderation and not jump from extreme to extreme unless you're equipped to do it with your gate 15.
Yeah, well, and I just realized it was when you were talking about the God rest his soul, but the guy Matt who passed away, who was in human design, and he was eating, I guess, all raw before he ended up in the hospital. Or I don't know if it was right before. I don't really know. I didn't do any research on that. So I'm sorry if I am misspeaking, but I was thinking about that concept. And like also just for everyone's knowledge, Laura has Libra in her seventh house and Jupiter in Libra in her seventh house. And she is splenic projector. And I feel like the spleen has so much to do with balance. Like I feel like
Oh
the
well,
sign.
yeah, all of Libra's in basically
Yeah,
in the spleen.
yeah. And it's just an interesting, for me, like I've been thinking a lot about I have absolutely zero defined gates in my spleen. Like nothing is there. I'm completely spleenically open. And like I have done some of the most just insane things that you could think like of a human. Like I've gone to extremes without gate 15. I've gone to extremes in drinking. I've gone to extremes in smoking cigarettes, smoking weed. I've gone to extremes in my diet. I've gone into all kinds of extreme places. And I would say like 99.9% of the time agree that the human body is seeking homeostasis at all times. But then I was also thinking about how, if you are like if your body has been in a sense conditioned into eating foods that aren't necessarily actually good for it, when you do try and go onto a diet, it's going to feel like you are holding, you aren't giving yourself something that your body feels like it needs. And so sometimes I feel like these moments of detox like remind your body what is actually what it needs versus what it thinks it needs, because it's seeking homeostasis. And so I guess in that 0.01% of the times, there's like these moments where I think detox can be like there can be a shock that can kind of cleanse the system and get you back to a kind of more real sense of homeostasis within yourself, as opposed to like one that has been conditioned based on maybe poor diet habits throughout your life. And I've been thinking about that as someone who right now you could say I'm on an extreme diet, but like I don't feel like malnourished. I don't feel sick. And I have felt that way when I was on other diets, which I was talking about a little bit before in the past. I felt really unwell. And the reason that I can do this right now is because, in a sense, I've been preparing to do it, right? I've been kind of like inching myself towards it in a way, understanding that like my body craves things, and it might be craving things because of my conditioning. I was sharing with Lora that my dad, his mom ate like a ton of salami. The woman was Hungarian. She was hugely into cured meats. And she ate a ton of salami in his pregnancy, while she was pregnant with him. And when he came out, basically the man, like, you've never met somebody who likes salami more than him. And like, I would not argue that salami is good for him. He's splenic and he loves salt. He's always going to go back to that. But in a sense, his spleen is saying it's giving him the okay, because it's not like a drop in the bucket is going to kill you. However, he also had quadruple bypass in his heart this past year. Well, I think it was about 18 months ago now. And that's because, again, it's like, it's a drop in the bucket. One thing may not hurt you in the moment, and you can't really judge like salami based on eating it one time. But when you do it kind of in excess over the course of a lifetime, you run into trouble. And that's where I think, if I could force my dad to do anything, which I absolutely can't, I would have been like, you need to like clean it out so that you're not in this state of like always wanting pork roll, always wanting salami, always wanting this kind of food, because you were literally like, your physical body was made out of it in a sense. There's like a lot of the components of salami that went into the pregnancy when my grandma was pregnant. So I was just thinking about how like there is extremes that may be really healthy and helpful when we get stuck within our own kind of homeostasis and the things that we do. And maybe this is more true for splenic people. Like, we get the go ahead in doing them because they're not going to kill us in that moment, but they may deplete our ability to live in the most like healthful way over the course of time. So yeah, I mean, this was just something that I was thinking about in terms of balance, understanding homeostasis, thinking about it in terms of the fact that you can be in kind of like, you can like desire a negative sort of homeostasis where, you want salami all the time because you're used to giving that to yourself. And it can lead to, in not in the moment, but in the kind of long-term negative outcomes. Do you want to speak to anything there, Lora?
A bit. First off, I wonder how many parasites your dad has if he's a constant salami eating machine.
Surely a lot. Surely a lot.
I'm Croatian and we are big on salami too. So like I understand, like Hungary's our neighbor. We're both big on salami. Um, I get the love for salami. My sister has a child who's a year old, and when she was pregnant with him, she craved a lot of sour fruits and vegetables, or I guess fruits, sour fruit. Um, and I mean, she already likes fruit a lot and always loved fruit and liked sour things, but it became an extreme where that's the only thing her body craved. And it's not like she was like, I'm gonna eat this on purpose. It's what her body as a form was craving. And so she ate a lot of sour fruit. And her son loves acidic things. He loves sour fruit. He would be a fruitarian, I think, if he could. Um, but he'll eat like sour oranges and lemons and tangerines and just everything acidic. And so perhaps it's the baby that was causing the mother to have the cravings and not necessarily the mother who conditioned the baby to have the cravings. Maybe it was the baby that conditioned the form. Or both, or maybe it's a two-way street and not a one-way street. But like I can see it with them. But like understanding cravings during pregnancy, like your body wants to eat what it wants to eat, and if it doesn't get that, it's gonna throw up. And so you kind of have to cater to whatever it is that the body needs to in order to get nutrients, because otherwise, like your baby's not gonna grow, and like you have to listen to your form. It's like a very complete lesson in surrender. So there's my sense on that. And then just thinking back to the balance thing, I have a friend who's an acupuncturist, and she's talked about balance to me before. I'd like took one of her Zoom classes on something or other. I think it was like self massage or like self acupressure. I can't remember what it was about, but I think it was probably like on a solstice or on an equinox. And the lesson that ingrained the movement was about finding the homeostasis, finding the balance, and like always knowing that that center exists within us whenever we go from extreme to extreme. But then, yeah, again, it's like interesting. Like once you push yourself to one end of the spectrum, your body has to constantly um re-center itself, re-find its footing to figure out, okay, like if I'm dealing with these extremes, where is my balance now? And it has to recalibrate to that new conditioning that it's experiencing to find whatever balance is then and there. Um, and so I think that was like my concern, like when we go far, too far to one end of the spectrum and we recalibrate ourselves to having a new center of balance, that's not necessarily what our body originally had or intended, then what's it like to go journey back to the original form of balance? Which, you know, could be said for any sort of extreme that we experience. The thing that comes to mind is like cancer, having chemotherapy as treatment. If you're experiencing that, your body has to find a new balance of like what it means to have an extremely compromised immune system and not being able to probably take down food and get the nutrients it needs. And so it's finding its homeostasis in this complete new environment, internal environment. And eventually, when things get better, you can't just go back to your old patterns because the body is not used to those. It's been conditioned to accept a new reality. And so you have to slowly ease your way back into quote unquote normality. Um, yeah, those are the weird random thoughts that come to mind. Cancer and whatever else I said. Self-massage, acupuncture, acupressure.
Yeah. Well, and I think if ever there's a time to talk about or to be extreme, maybe it is at these points. And if ever there is a time for balance, it's at the other two points. Um, and you know, one thing I will say, I cannot speak to your sister and her baby, but I know my grandma was eating cured meats long before my dad was there, but he ratcheted it up. He sure did. So anyway, that was one thing that I wanted to talk about because I just think that, you know, I don't think that as super conditioned people, we can just like fully accept strategy and authority in a way where we're not kind of coming into a like kind of a real reflectiveness on what we have been conditioned in, specifically in food, because food is where we get conditioned primarily first in the most kind of severe ways as children. And like how that is playing into our what would be considered our like our authority. There's almost like an unwrapping that needs to happen, at least for my own perspective. And we were talking last week about identity, and like I've seen so many people who have open and undefined spleens who've like really like identified with certain types of foods that are just not good for them. Like like their identity is like, I like bagels with cream cheese, you know, which is not to say that bagels with cream cheese are just bad in general, but it's like, but is it like, is that really your identity? Like, is food a part of what your identity is, or is that something that you were conditioned to and you took that on as your identity? And I'm not saying that there's an answer to that I have for them, but I think it's an important question to ask, because even too, with splenic people that I've seen, there's a quality of their identity being kind of around an identity being built around food as well, and like what they like and what they don't like. And I think the question still needs to be asked in terms of that, if we have not come from a completely deconditioned life, kind of on the outset of having parents who were, you know, not conditioning us with even food. And I think one of the places that our culture conditions us the most is in the food that we eat. And so I've talked about patriarchy, and now I've talked about food. Like, these are some of like the deepest things that I feel like we have to, you know, consider and put our awareness onto if we are to really be able to understand what it means to fully decondition and be following strategy and authority in a way that's more embodied.
I have thoughts.
Okay, go ahead.
I have surprisingly a lot of thoughts. Yes, yes, to what you said. Also, oh dear, come on, brain, you can power through. Strategy and authority is an extreme, like talking about extreme imbalance and like finding homeostasis, like all of a sudden doing strategy and authority and completely changing the way you operate your life. My goodness, that is like a huge extreme change of like your reality and how you recenter yourself. So just wanted to like put that out there. Talking about extremes today with Kate 15 active. And also I something that came to mind was like my not quite my childhood, my youth, my teen development years, where you tend to form your sense of identity and sense of self. My best friend, she shockingly, not shockingly, very fittingly, is a Libra with an undefined spleen, and she has 515 in her chart. I'm pretty darn sure she has, if I remember correctly, she has 515 as a sacral definition with an undefined spleen. And she, and well, again, she has this set identity, so she has a set way in which she experiences her extremes, but she would constantly want to try some sort of extreme diet. And my sister, we were like a trio, the three of us, very consistent hangout penta of us together. Well, not a complete penta, but you know what I mean. But we would hang out, and my sister would always be on board with the extremes, and they would always, you know, have plans to like lose weight or do this or do that or like change what they're eating. They both really got into gluten-freeness at the same time because their bodies were sensitive to gluten, so it was like great for them. But like my body's not sensitive to gluten. Like my body can take all the gluten it wants, and I don't have any perceived on the surface consequences of it. Perhaps there are things going deep down within that I'm not aware of, but for the most part, on the surface, my body's fine with it. So you bet I'm gonna continue eating it. But I had to join their little like obsessiveness, and they would one time they like wanted to lose weight, and they tried to decide the best way to do that sort of fear factor to motivate them to lose the weight. So if like, they didn't lose the weight by a certain given amount of time, again, like we're young ladies, we don't need to lose weight. I don't know, we were in high school or like college or what, but like really you don't need to focus on losing weight as your priority at that age in your life or ever, unless you're severely overweight, which we weren't. They were just obsessed with appearances. Anyways, fear mongering, like decided like if you don't lose weight by a certain given period, then you have to like the others would choose some horrific thing that the person had to experience. And my Libra friend, she's afraid of birds, so her punishment would be to like have to like go to an aviarium, whatever it is, the aviary, wherever it is that they have birds, and like interact with the birds and hold the birds and pet the birds or whatever. I don't remember my sisters. And like I, with my defined spleen, was like, I can't think of anything that would like scare me or make me uncomfortable. So they're like, okay, you'll have to dye your hair red. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I do kind of want red hair. I guess I'm thinking about when I first had my hair red. I guess this was when I was in college or shortly after. But I was like, yeah, I wanted to dye my hair red. So like the whole fear thing did not motivate me at all. But again, like I'm not the type of person that I'm gonna commit. Again, this connects to something you want to talk about, which is discipline. But I wasn't gonna discipline myself because I didn't care about losing weight. I was just part of the wanting attention and interaction from my friends, wanting to be included. So I was like, okay, yeah, whatever, I guess I'll do it. But I really didn't put any effort into losing weight because, again, not a priority for my body. But it just made me think about like those extremes. Like she's done the carnivore diet. She's gone days where all she does is drink milk. She's just gone from extreme to extreme, and it's ironic because she's a Libra and you think she'd naturally be great at balance, but no, because she has the undefined spleen. And just, to correct myself, I said earlier, all of Libra is in the spleen. It's not. Obviously, this fall equinox is the beginning of Libra, and that's in the G center, as we said, with the vessel of love, gate 46. It's not in the spleen. But a majority of Libra is in the spleen. And so, yeah, it's interesting because she has the extremes. She has 515, even though her sun is in Libra. Um, and her sun is in the splenic center. It's in an undefined center that she doesn't have consistent access to. And so she's probably always seeking that balance, seeking that feel good energy in her form. And it's not a given for her. And so her body has the ability to go through extremes with her energy. And so it's going to do that, probably seeking the expression of that balance. And that's just her journey. That's just her life, and she does it. She goes for it, and just like I could not. I could not in a conditional hypothetical sense of the word, but also like I could not, like in the past I was not able to do the things that they were doing. I was not able to discipline myself and try to eat less to lose weight, or to do different weird diets and like only eat one thing. um no, my body rules my form, not my mind, and I let my body do what my body does. Which maybe is just like, yeah, splenic thing. And sometimes that's eating a bunch of unhealthy things, not necessarily bagels and cream cheese. But it's like you were saying, that's like my form of homeostasis, and it's not gonna kill me, but I probably could do better.
It's so interesting just that you said in the beginning. I'm going to go through a couple different things that like strategy and authority is an extreme, because it is. And it's like it's a shock to your mental, it's a shock to your mind, it's a shock to your personality. And as somebody who has made a lot of extreme decisions around dieting that were mental, I can see how there is a real problem there. Like, it's not, you're not doing it for what I would consider like it's again, it's not following strategy and authority, but beyond that, it's not necessarily correct for you. It might not be correct for your body. You might not be doing things that are actually healthy for your body because you're doing things that your mind is telling you to do. And all of that stuff. But it's, the thing that I've really been coming into terms with lately. And it's funny that, oops, sorry, that's Ruby. My dog is barking in the background. I'm just going to close my door really quick. Please pause.
Such is life with little canine friends.
But yeah, I mean, there's like a discernment that's required, and I've been thinking about this a lot because of where I am right now, and the state of like discipline that is required. Let me say this: the state of willpower that's required to do things that are maybe not necessarily good for you. You can have the access to that willpower as an undefined ego person if there's definition. And so you can just as quickly have definition in these places, these areas that give you willpower to do things that are mental, that aren't necessarily helping anyone, right? Like there's nothing about, I don't think, it's one of the most homogenizing things to be concerned about your weight I think as a girl, it's super, like, that's a amazingly homogenized just belief and tendency that we have to do. That's not to say that like physical health isn't important, and that if you are overweight in a way that is not as taking away from your health, that there's something wrong with wanting to lose weight in that way. But doing it for appearance sake alone, I think, you know, we can agree that maybe that's not the best reason to be making decisions as yourself. And I don't really think that you're making decisions as yourself if that's the reason, but you know, neither here nor there. There's always examples of where I'll be wrong about things. And so I've kind of come to terms with that. But yeah, I mean, the discipline thing that I've been thinking about is something that I cannot pronounce her name, but Pragya Beniwal. I don't know. She's on Instagram. I think it's Pragya. We follow her. Projector Stories does. So if I'm butchering it, you can see who we follow and find her. But she had posted something about how bitterness is not just about initiating when you're not supposed to be initiating, but also has to do with the bitterness that comes from not having the discipline to navigate correctly with your aura in this world, or the discipline to not know when to take your awareness away from the thing that you are paying attention to that's making you bitter. And those two things have to do with there's these other kind of alternative ways that we can get bitter within ourselves. And the bitterness is always just speaking to the same thing, is what she was getting at, is that it is always saying that you're not being yourself in some way, shape, form, or fashion here. Maybe you haven't learned how to navigate properly with your aura in this world, like she said. Maybe it's because you haven't developed the proper discipline to take your awareness away from things that are not correct for you. I know that as an open mind person, that's a huge one for me. I'm sorry, an open head person, that's a huge one for me, because it can be really difficult to avert my attention from something that I know is not for me and that is making me bitter, but I have like a kind of urge or a need or a not self desire to continue looking at it. And it kind of gave me a new perspective on discipline, because too, she's a mental projector, so she doesn't have an ego. She doesn't have a defined ego, at least she doesn't have one consistently. And so when she was using the word discipline, I was really trying to like square that circle, or circle that square, with the fact that, like, what is the difference between discipline and willpower? And how can discipline be a positive thing that we aren't conflating with the idea of willpower? Because specifically, like in this instance for me, where I'm doing this, I guess you could say diet, but really what it feels like is I'm doing something really loving and caring for myself. And it seems to be in alignment with, you know, what my body wants anyway, in a way that I didn't even know that I could access, because until I did this, I didn't even see how badly I was craving these types of foods, because I was too conditioned by my emotions to want specific types of foods that weren't necessarily good for me. And I would go after them because I was craving them emotionally, not necessarily physically. And I would not have this perspective on it had there not been this kind of decision to cut away some other foods. Now, that doesn't mean that has to be how it works for everyone. And my way is really only my way, but it was an interesting thing for me to think about in terms of discipline and the value of discipline for those of us that don't have willpower, how that looks when we're not doing something in order to prove ourselves, but we're doing something in order to love ourselves, and give ourselves what we need in a way that is kind of coming from, I guess you could say, like a more self-aware and self-reflective place, and not just like a mental let me drink all this cow's milk because I'm going to lose weight on this diet kind of place. And like those subtleties are really important to start to peel away at. But before I go on, Laura, do you want to touch on anything there?
Yeah. Well, just to say the cow's milk thing wasn't to lose weight at that point. It was for health reasons of she has the undefined spleen and she has health issues. And so she goes to extremes to try to regulate her health. Um, Same with the carnivore diet. It was, omitting completely all vegetables to try to fix certain things that she felt were wrong with her body. And like I know other people who also do the carnivore diet, which any sort of extreme, it's just like it goes back to that like wildness of how my body's, judging it, or my mind is judging it rather, not my body. But I did want to say on discipline. That's interesting. So, I mean, Sarah, well, you mentioned to me that you want to talk about discipline, and I didn't know the context of where it was coming from or how it differed from willpower or anything. So, it sparked some curiosity in me when you just said that. And so I did a little bit of investigating this morning into the line companion or the I Ching to see like where does Ra talk about discipline? Because like my mind automatically goes to gate 9, which is my personality sun, because I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, the line for my sun in gate 9 is like adherence to the letter of the law. Sounds very discipline-y, but there is no actual discipline in that particular line. So I was wondering like where is discipline mentioned? And it shows up in gate 4, it shows up in gate 9, it shows up in gate 52, shows up in gate 30. I can't remember all the others, but gate 9.4 and 52.4, I think 52.4 is called self-discipline. And I can't remember what, and I think 9.4 is called dedication. And it just made me think about the human design nuance of those terms of, 52 is the gate of stillness. And like Mercury is there right now, surprise, surprise. So it's not super shocking to me that this is what our neutrinos are focusing on with consciousness, because
Yeah.
it's there in the weather. But 52 is about stillness. It's having the focused drive, because the root center is about drive, to be still, to be able to focus your energy for repeating patterns in gate 9 and like use your sacral energy in that way. And
Mm.
it made me think about discipline as like, that repeating of patterns. When you discipline yourself, you're doing something over and over again, or you're training yourself to do something over and over again, which is very logical, not like logical in the terms of the normal definition of logic, but in terms of tree. It's finding those repeating patterns so that they can be programmed into the collective for the future for some productive purpose. And then, like in 9, that energy is being used to be consistent with the details of using your energy to focus on the details and do whatever it needs to be done, like energy wise. And then in gate 5, it becomes a pattern, it becomes consistent, it becomes natural. And then if in 15, it becomes an extreme. Um, or so that's like where the logic would point it out through the circuit. And so it made me think like there's other places where discipline shows up, but the first place was in gate 4. And so I wonder if yeah, I don't know if that's how she pronounced her name either, but that's how I mentally pronounce it. I don't know if she has what gates she has as part of her mental projector definition, whether it is 63-4 or not. But I wouldn't be surprised if discipline is part of that gate and it's there in her definition. But also it's there in 52 right now, not necessarily in 52.4, but it's 52.2 with Mercury right now as we speak. With the focus, like the drive of stillness, to being able to be still and secure in form in order to be able to do whatever needs to be done. Like to me, discipline is, I was thinking about it with, thinking about gate 9, but like it just seems like a sacral thing to have consistent energy to do something.
Are you still there?
I was receiving a call, sorry.
Oh,
She might call again, my sister. But I was
that's okay.
thinking about discipline as a sacral energy. It's the consistent energy to be able to do whatever it is that you're doing. Whereas willpower, it's more of a one and done. The ego center wants to prove itself, so it's going to muster up the energy to prove itself, and then it wants to rest. It doesn't want to do things consistently over and over and over again. It just wants to exert its energy and then be done and be like, okay, I'm done. You guys take care of the rest now. But it can show up when needed. I mean, at least part of, the ego center is both ego and willpower um, within its gates. But I think about, the gate 40 and gate 26 as sort of the willpower gates. Or is gate 26 the ego? I don't know anymore. But when it comes to discipline, like I think sacral energy. But again, like not every sacral person is here to be dedicated and disciplined because the abstract energy within the sacral, it's here to have experience, then be done with it. It's not here to do it over and over and over again into a repeating pattern. It wants to have its experience, have its beginning, conclude it with its ending, and then move on. And then just be present in the now with the 2946. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about. My mind goes towards again. Can you
I
hear
knew
me?
it. Yeah, I can hear you. I can
Okay.
hear you. You can text her while while I'm talking, I guess. Well, I was just looking at Pragya's chart. Luckily, it's Praggyabenniwal. Okay, so if anyone is interested, you can find her on Instagram. But she does have the 30. She does have the 5. She does not have the 4. Just to speak to the gates that you were talking about, and I have the 30, so I don't have sacral definition though. And I was thinking a lot about, kind of philosophically the idea of discipline and also the idea of like growing up, quote unquote. And I guess maturing is a better way to say that. Although I'm pretty sure there's a channel that's like has to do with maturation.
Well,
In and of itself.
that's the abstract. That's the other side of the format.
43. Yeah. So, but nonetheless, I feel like maturation is not necessarily something that only happens to people who have the 4253. Maybe in terms of the specific nuanced ways that word is being used for, the keynote, we can say that, but on a kind of larger scale, I think that maturation is something that can happen to all of us if we are growing into our purpose, aka our incarnation cross, and our character is developing throughout our process. That was something else that she talked about. I was going to send you the video, but this was kind of too late in the day to include this as part of what we were going to talk about. But she also made a video about life processes and the different returns, like the solar return versus things like the Saturn return and that kind of thing. But I think that when it comes to what I've been, philosophizing, what I've been like waxing over here about, I was thinking, there's been a lot of people in my life, especially men that I've dated, I've told to grow up. And it was mainly because I was very mature, quote unquote, mature, for my age, because I was given a lot more responsibility as a child because I had very immature caregivers. And then it made me wonder, well, like, what is maturity? What is immaturity? What does this look like? And the thing that I realized was the most important quality that I was really speaking to when I've told people to grow up, or when I was thinking about my parents' own immaturity, is the fact that they never stopped doing what they wanted to do impulsively, reactively, maybe physically reactively or mentally reactively, and taken time, to decide if what it is that they were doing is in alignment and integrity with who it is that they want to be or who it is that they truly are. Right? It's like my body likes smoking cigarettes, but I don't my identity doesn't want to be someone who's smoking cigarettes. And so there's these little moments that we have in every way. That's just a really kind of basic example throughout our day-to-day awareness where we have these kind of forks in the road. And I mean it as forks because I don't think it has to be like this huge kind of, you need to like draw your strength from the bottom of your feet and like all the way up to make the decisions that are more in alignment with who it is that you truly are versus like, I guess what you could call your not self. And the people who I find to be the most matured are the ones that I find to be the most like in integrity with themselves have been the ones to make decisions that are in alignment with kind of who it is that they truly are versus like what impulsively they want in the moment. And it's like when we're constantly just going from that kind of stimulus to stimulus to stimulus to stimulus to stimulus, we never get to ask ourselves, like sit back and say, like, is this thing in alignment with my character? Is this thing in alignment with my purpose? Kind of like you could say, like, is, the Sarah unit, is like this Sarah physical body, is like this thing I'm about to do in alignment with like her, her ultimate like purpose. And that's, I think, a deeper question to orient yourself around and to put awareness on, where it does not have to be a matter of trying to white knuckle it or do things that are hard. But if you're aware of that question, it may change the way that you make decisions without it having to be a real heroic, monumental task. And that was part of the reason that I am making the decisions that I'm making now, besides the fact that I have access to willpower right now, which again, we'll see how much of the willpower, once it's gone, will take with it my capacity to be on this diet, and how much of it has turned into a part of my identity. And when I say identity, I don't mean it in the G center terms. I mean it in kind of the larger identity, the essence of who it is that I am as a juxtaposed personality, body, magnetic monopole situation, as opposed to like a kind of strictly not self homogenized situation. So, this isn't to say that you have to do anything, right? Because I feel like there's a danger there when we're like, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that, because then we get into ego, trying to prove worthiness territory. But I think that the only way that we're able to advance on our journey into becoming ourselves is to learn how to use our awareness, especially as projectors, in ways that light up areas where we can expand to kind of grow into our purpose, our incarnation cross. And it's all about awareness. It's just about where we're looking. It's not about what we're doing. It's not about how hard we're working. It's not about how heavy of a thing we can carry or how hard we can be on ourselves. It's about the way that we perceive things, and especially as projectors. And so, yeah, that has been something too that I've been considering when it comes to like kind of laughably me saying to like an old ex, like, grow up, but like realizing that, first of all, when I said that, I didn't even know what it meant. And now when I understand what I was trying to get at, like, I also needed to grow up when I was saying that, because even though I had been through more severe instances, I still had not moved on from just doing things in the moment that satiated my impulses and my need for stimulus and my need for emotional comfort. But I was actually like, I was always doing that then. And now I'm not making decisions necessarily perfectly as myself, but my awareness has shifted to include, okay, wait a second, is this a part of, like, is this thing inherent to Sarah's development as a character in the storyline of her life? And I don't have to make the right decision, but at least if I'm asking it, I think it brings me more in alignment than if I'm not. I'm sure there's something you got to say from that, Lora.
Yes. I feel like my brain is very scattered, so I don't know if this will make sense or if I'm able to put it out in a way that makes sense because I feel like I'm still forming thoughts about it. But from what you said, it seems like so like the idea of maturation or for someone to be mature is to make decisions correctly as themselves, right? To like whittle it all down, to make decisions that are truth to their character, which if we're looking at their character, it's them living their human design mechanics, living out who it is that they are, not making spontaneous decisions from the mind for what feels good. Um, right.
I mean, I feel like, I'll probably regret saying that that's it, but it's something along those lines with a lot more nuance to
Okay.
add.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like the I don't know. My brain, it has feelings, but it doesn't have the words to articulate the feelings. Um, because I think about that, and I think part of what makes you think what you're thinking is the fact that you talked about your caregivers and they were projectors. And like, I don't have projector caregivers. My caregivers are generators. And it makes me think about the generator aura and how it's here to have satisfaction and to do what is satisfying to the form. And I don't know, it makes me also think about how we value maturity and what we perceive as someone being mature and how we put that up on a pedestal of like being mature is a good thing, whereas being mature is a bad thing. Or we criticize humans who are immature. It's the love of extremes. Like we're looking at these different extremes and or at least I'm looking at these different extremes and finding the love for people who are not necessarily like my love and compassion for them, but for the acceptance of people who are immature versus mature and the different ways it all exists. Because like my father, one can say he's immature because he's emotionally reactive. He sits at the computer and plays computer games for a lot of the day. He just like watches a bunch of TV. Um, and yeah, like he provides for our family and he takes care of our needs. And yet, he is a bit emotionally immature and he just does things that satisfy his sacral center for a lot of the day, like playing games on the computer. And yet, that is him. I mean, he is it him? I don't know how much of what he does is not self, but like it's him living out his life, living out his purpose of, as I've mentioned in a previous episode, with like how he actually makes the money. It's very visible within his incarnation cross. Um, but yeah, I don't know, like the idea that someone has to be mature, like comparing generators to projectors, like projectors, we're not here to be satisfied. We're here to be successful. And so one can say like success comes from maturity or success, not like material success out in the world, but projector success of correctly guiding someone might come from making mature decisions of, being true to ourselves and not seeking recognition in ways that is not correct for us, or just like wanting to be seen, wanting attention on us, or whatever it is that we do as incorrect projectors, trying to meddle our lives into those of others with it being uninvited. Um, my brain is like not able to form the fully fledged thought out. So there's more, but it's half cooked. It can't come out. I don't know. There's things to say, but I don't know what to say, so I'm just sitting here rambling, and I'll stop now.
Yeah. Um, yeah, we got the massive summer solstice neutrino stream coming at us, y'all. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. You're just gonna have to deal with it. Um, yeah, I mean, there's obviously more things to be said, but I don't necessarily want to beat a dead horse. I feel like I said, it as best as I could given my own circumstances.
But I
And I
feel like
do
what you said is because of your circumstances.
well, and I think that there
Because that's what
is
it is to be human. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
well, no, and I meant given my circumstances like brain wise right now. Not generally speaking, but yeah, everyone can only speak to their life. And I think that the thing that I come back to over and over again is like, I don't necessarily think that your dad is going to be someone that we can use as an example of maturation versus not, because more than likely he's not self. And just because he's not self doesn't mean he doesn't have moments of satisfaction. Like there's all kinds of generators who are doing things that give them momentary satisfaction, but that don't necessarily give them long-term satisfaction. And I think that there's a differential there. And so to use almost anyone as an example is not going to work, because most people are not satisfied. Most people are not successful. Most people are not peaceful. Most people are not surprised. And not only that, but most people are, generally speaking, and this is what I was saying before, and like when we come to extremes, I think we have to take into account that the planet is dominated by impulsive reactivity. So of course there's a time for it. There's absolutely a time for it. There's a time for acidity. There's a time for yang, but we've come to kind of the penultimate time of those things. And so if we're looking at it in terms of balance, what we need is more yin. What we need is more, in a sense, it's not maturation in the way of, this is what I've seen because I've never seen it. No, I don't think anyone's seen it. All I can speak to is what I imagine it to be based on my experiences. And that's all anyone can speak to it, really, because again, there is just not that many examples of people living correctly as themselves. And so my imaginings are the best that I can do until there's materialized examples of it in the world. But I think when we're on one extreme, saying that people behaving in that extreme is part of the kind of dance of opposites is true. But when we've left out the other side of the coin, again, the yin, the receptivity, the reflectiveness that's required to not make impulsive and reactive decisions, awareness over unconsciousness, body over mind, all of those things. And I also think it's dangerous to conflate like bodies' impulses when those impulses have been conditioned with what's actually correct for your body. And so there's of course so many ways that I need to qualify what I'm saying. It's always going to be the case. And of course I can only ever speak to what I've experienced in my own imaginings based on that. So I feel like that's redundant. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said, I think, just about the concept of maturation as it relates to human design and what the real maturation of a person can potentially look like if it's actually happening. And again, I don't think there's a lot of examples of that yet.
Yeah. It's a big topic. I feel like I have to go back and listen to everything that you said the first time. Because again, my sleepy brain is not at its best today, and that's okay. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to share this episode?
Well, the only other thing that was on my list was just the women's cycles and thinking about them. Because we were talking last week, again, we were talking about how, what was it? How like women's cycles are kind of similar to the emotional like process of waiting out the wave, and that men are more like splenic. But like, I'm using both of these terms, man as in like the hormonal man that gets specific hormones, even though we are aware of the fact that a man who has specific daily hormones can too also have an emotional wave, and vice versa. Women who has the feminine estrogenic cycle can also have a splenic definition and not be emotional in that kind of way. But there was something that we said along the lines of, what was it? It was along the lines of the fact that women, men kind of like, it's like, it is what it is because every day they wake up to the same thing. Whereas for women, like there can be like a moodiness to it that goes up and that goes down. And so, and this is when we were talking about men and women and kind of the dynamic that we have created within our culture around patriarchal conditioning and things like that. And women can have, oh God, what the hell? Oh man, please don't make, I think I'm catching it. Oh no. I think I caught it before I even got on the phone, to be honest with you. So it wasn't from you. I think this is just permeating, but, basically the fact that like women don't have consistent access to their own, to the same kind of consistency that men have because they're in a cycle. But I've often said, and I wonder if you think this is true too, Laura, that despite women having like moods, like I think there's a deeper truth that women can come to because of their moods. Like I know that we get moody, you know, I call it moody, but like right before I get my period, I can be like a little bit more sensitive to things. I think you might have used the word snarky. You know, there's many words that we can use, but I actually think that that sensitivity, that extreme sensitivity is an intelligence. Like I think that it is speaking to us to look at places that are necessary to look at. It's not to say that we always need to be looking at them, but I think it's giving us intelligence, even though it may come off as sometimes like overly emotional or overly sensitive or overly moody. So I wonder if you agree, if you feel like it's just the hormonal cycle, or if you feel like there's some intelligence that's going on there, a deeper intelligence because of our ability to kind of get into those spaces.
I would agree. Didn't we agree to this whenever we talked about it the first time? Well, I think part of having fluctuating hormones, I couldn't remember the word there, hormones affects our brain chemistry. And so our neurotransmitters change. I'm pretty sure, like throughout our cycle, like our brain chemistry, it's not just that our hormonal chemistry is different throughout the month, but as a result of that, our brain chemistry changes throughout the month. And of course, that's going to change how we see and how we're making connections and synapses with our consciousness and how we're interpreting things to gain deeper intelligence. Like, sure, I feel like it's easy to say, like, yeah, women are smarter than men, to just pill it down to that. But yeah, I mean, but like at the same time, there is intelligence to seeing things in a very logical black and white way, seeing things at face value and gleaning face value and like not overlooking into things because sometimes all you need to know is they're at face value. And as women, we can overanalyze things and get into the nitty-gritty and come up then with stories about what's happening when the truth was there and simple to begin with. Um, and like the analogy for this is thinking about ladies who like overanalyze their partner's male behavior in a relationship, in a hetero whatever relationship, can't heterogeneous, it's not heterogeneous, whatever the word is, and like
Normative.
yeah, whatever it is. Like a woman might overanalyze her man's behavior and trying to like explain reasons for why he's doing what he's doing when like he's just doing it and there is no overcomplicated explanation for why he's doing what he's doing, like that sort of thing. I can see both extremes. I feel like the theme of extremes has been like it's gonna be our title, but
It definitely is going to be our
it's just like
title.
it's hard not to with this current energy not to see the extremes of just like yes, there is intelligence to looking at the complexity of something. And yeah, there's also intelligence to see things for what they are without needing to go deep, deep, deep into what's happening. Like there's value on both sides. The spleen and the solar plexus are both awareness centers, as is the ajna. They all offer intelligence.
Yes. Well, no, and I definitely agree with that. I just meant because I think you gave me, when we were talking offline about moodiness, and you gave me a thumbs up on me saying that like there's, you know, I think there's something to moodiness. But, of course, like anything else, it's like if you wield something in the wrong way, it doesn't necessarily, it's not like we can just like say every time a woman is moody, she is being intelligent, so shut up.
But on the other hand, I feel like it's not just emotional, mental intelligence. I feel like it's also physical intelligence. Like when we are in our PMS phase, my body is more sensitive to physical things around me, like food I put in my body, sounds, noises, people, interactions. So it's not just like me having a deeper emotional intelligence about something that's happening because of moodiness, but it's also physical sensitivities. Like you might be numb to certain things, like in my splenic way. I might be eating things that aren't great for me, and I might not notice the repercussions of eating those things because my body is like, it's fine, it's a drop in the water, it's not going to kill me. But then come to that time when my body is much more sensitive, not just my mind, but like my body, my physical self, then those drops have a lot more consequence to my physical well-being, where I get headaches, I get body aches, I get back pain, I get different things that are happening physically as a consequence of me being more negligent with my care. And so there is a body intelligence there too that becomes amplified through the highs and lows of our cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and that's kind of like the deeper thing that I've kind of been coming to in myself, just from my own kind of self study of like seeing the way that the more sensitive I become to, and like the more aware I become, and the less unconscious I am about what I'm consuming. And also just like, I used to smoke a lot of weed, and I smoked a lot of cigarettes and drank a lot of alcohol. Like the further away I get from that whole entire kind of lifestyle, the more I realize that, like, for example, when I was working with a guy who was an entrepreneur, and he had, made millions of dollars selling his last company, every time I would go on my period, I knew like my body, like he was not good, he was bad news, and the rest of the month I could kind of like push it off, but like right before I would get my period and during it, it was like, no, you got to stay away from this guy. And it took me a while to actually be like, I can't do this anymore. But it just made me realize that there was this potential that, even though it felt like I was almost at a disadvantage in those moments where I'm like, why am I so sensitive? Why am I not able to just push through like usual? It's like that was actually me realizing, or that was me getting physical body intelligence about the fact that like something wasn't correct for me, even if my mind had been like overstepping it or like completely disregarding that kind of like the subtlety that was coming into me about him like during the rest of the month. So yeah, I mean that was kind of the deeper thought that I had been thinking about it, and like how the incorrect things, maybe in terms of bitterness for projectors or otherwise, they might be louder for us when we're coming kind of to that phase of our cycle. Um, and it might just be like more signposts trying to direct us into the correct physical direction, with our design body, our juxtaposed personality and the magnetic monopole. But more to uncover on that on my own journey with it, but it was just something that I thought was important to touch on.
I just want to share the possibility that just because he was most incorrect when you were at your most sensitive doesn't necessarily mean that it's always incorrect. It makes me think about just like sacral definition of sometimes your body is open to having the energy for something and sometimes it's not. Doesn't mean it's constantly like it's also a splenic thing of just because it's no right now doesn't mean it's going to be a no tomorrow or a no the next day. Um, the very like in the now existential way of looking at life is this person can be incorrect half the month and it can be correct the rest of the month, which makes relationships very, very complicated. But that is like the nuance of correct mechanics. Like sometimes things are correct half the time. And you have to be able to be okay with those extremes of being willing to be there when it's correct and not be there when it's not correct for whatever nuanced reason. Um, yeah, it's just the weird existential ways of life. It's not very like finitial. It's finite, but I want to say it with the IIL, and I don't know what word that is. Maybe it's not a word. It's not very finite the way that the solar plexus can be.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that you know, it requires like a whole new like kind of adaptability to like social norms, because specifically for splenic people and for sacral people, it's like, okay, well, you have to be okay with saying no when it's no and yes when it's yes, right? Like you can't just say yes and then it's like that's it, you're on that thing forever now, even if your no is starting to come in, which is like so antithetical to what we're raised to do. It's like, be a man of your word. It's like, well, what if my word for this 2 weeks is this and my word for the next 2 weeks is that? Like I have to really put some boundaries up around the way that I communicate, so people understand that just like I'm not just always accessible because I'm accessible right now. Now, of course, for me with my emotional center, it is different because I didn't wait out anything really when it came to that situation, and so it was incorrect from the jump. And my mind kept trying to push me through it over and over and over again, even though it was incorrect. And my body was just, you know, screaming at me during those particular moments. But
But that's how
as
we became friends, bonding over what to do.
I know. Oh, I mean, well, we became friends because of well, I felt like it was because of Clubhouse, but then we got into more conversations because Laura was there when I literally within 2 months time broke up with my boyfriend, left my apartment and left my job. So that was a real interesting time to be sure. And you know, I'm a three body baby. I'm not regretting it. I'm just looking at it and trying to learn something so I don't make the same mistake twice. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Um, and I think maybe hopefully if anybody else is emotional and can relate, then, you know, and is a woman too, that maybe like give yourself some credit during those times. Now that doesn't mean be a freaking loose cannon, of course, but give yourself some credit. So yeah, okay, that's I think everything. I can't believe that I had literally PHS discipline, spleen and balance, dad and salami, women's cycle. That was my list, and that took an hour and a half to talk about.
What, did you think it would take less?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it just sounds so stupid when I say it, when I just read it
Salami.
out.
There's a
I
lot to
know.
say about salami, okay?
I know. It really, really cured meats, man. And trust me, like I still like salami. I'm not hating on it, but but anyway, okay, cool. Well, then we'll touch base after the solstice and after the full moon. That's on Friday, and we will talk next week. Laura, do you want to say anything else?
Um, sort of. I
Okay.
have to laugh at myself. Well, okay, so related to like the things we've been talking about, something that's been tickling my mind has been the question of like, for whom does it matter what they eat? You know, with human design, we're told that with PHS, it doesn't matter what you eat, it matters how you eat, and you can eat roadkill if we're all raw cared. As long as you ate it in the correct circumstances, then it would be correct for you. And I feel
Yeah.
like there is a lot of hard and fast rules that may not be correct about that. And so something I've been like mentally exploring is like trying to figure out, okay, for whom is it actually correct what they put in their body? Um, and I had the intention of posting in the PHS Facebook group about this, and I haven't gotten around to it. My idea is that tone is the factor, but like if you're listening and if you have thoughts and ideas, feel free to reach out to us in whatever way form you want to and share your ideas as I explore this concept mentally. But yeah, we're on Instagram at Projector Stories.
Oh wait, now I want to say something. Well, no, because that's something that, yeah, we've been kind of not really, but kind of talking about offline, and like, specifically with me too, because of my, my process and my threeness, and just like, basically like my own way of like doing this dance thing, and like seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. And also just like seeing, like, needing to question things in general. We can talk about PHS more next week, but like I think there's a lot more to it, or there's a lot more to it than just the way that it was outlined in Ra's PHS course. And I think that there's a lot to be discovered about it. But yeah, more to come on that. We can end now because my brain is also fuzzy.
Okay, we're on Facebook, I think also at Projector Stories. We're on YouTube at the Projector Story Podcast. You're probably listening to us on some Spotify or like podcast platform, whatever they're called. Feel free to reach out if you feel like reaching out or not. Thanks for listening to our thoughts. Anything else, Sarah?
No.
Okay, everyone, catch you on the flip side. Listen to you,
Bye.
or you'll listen to us next time. Bye.
Bye.